So why don't we start up? I'm Lance Eaton. Thank you everybody for coming to the comics panel. We have three really great artist creators here to talk about their experiences, to kind of show us a little bit about the industry that we may or may not have heard about before. And they're all great because, well, they just randomly responded to a tweet or some post that I put up on the internet and were willing to show up. So let's just give them a round of applause for that. And, I do have to give most props to Michael Goodwin on the right there, who he came the farthest from New York. So he wins the farthest distance prize to come to this event. And then we have Robert Gill in the middle, and Andrew MacLean. MacLean, sorry, on the end here. And what we're going to do is just basically first going to let them each talk about their experiences, kind of how they got into comics and all of that. Then we're just going to open it up to questions, and you're more than welcome to raise your hand. If you do ask a question, just make sure it's loud enough so everybody else can hear you, because I don't know how good the acoustics are here. And if there aren't questions, I'll just throw out all the ones that I've written up in the meantime, because I'm just as big a fanboy as anybody else. So, anyone wants to go first? Go for it. Who's made eye contact? You're up.
My name's Andrew MacLean. What were we doing? How we got into it?
Yeah, how you got into it, what you're doing within comics.
Well, I'll start with what I'm doing. Right now I'm working on a graphic novel for Dark Horse Comics, and in between I self-publish my own comics. So my self-publishing line is called Headhopper, and then my new graphic novel, Headhopper, it's a barbarian comic. It's kind of a parody. He cuts on heads of monsters, basically. And then my graphic novel is Apocalyptic Girl. It's kind of just my take on kind of the love letter to the apocalypse genre, but also the very select few animes that I enjoy. And I kind of got into it. I always wanted to do it as a kid, and eventually then I got into music for a while, and when I got burned out on that, I kind of came back to comics and started getting graphic design gigs, but that's not a lot of fun, and slowly transitioned that more into illustration, and slowly got into where I like it to be where I am today, which is complicated. So just
I'm Robert Gill. I generally go by Bob. Currently, I did some background books for DC over the past winter. Started with number 27. Number 30 just came out. And I did the work on the annual. That's out at the end of this month. I'm also working for Valiant right now. I just finished up an Internal Warrior arc. I don't know if any of you guys read any of this stuff. The 4 issues on that. The 4th one comes out at the end of this month as well. So it was a very busy winter for me. I basically didn't go outside. I stayed in my studio the entire time. I'm out. It was a perfect winter to be locked up inside. Now, at least the weather's nice, and I'm like shocked. I mean, I'm seeing sunlight and stuff. So yeah, you pay a little bit of price for that if you really want to get into comics. You guys probably know that you don't get out too much, depending on how much you work. I think I took it too extreme this past winter, and I'm hoping to lighten up my load a bit. So yeah, DC and Valiant is what I've been doing now. I spent some time working with smaller publishers like Cinescope, Dynamite, IDW. Did some Transformers stuff last summer. That was cool. I really got sick of drawing robots fast, big, whatever. So yeah, so I did that. So I got into comics when I was younger, about 10 years old, and I still remember picking up my first comic. It was a Tales from the Crypt comic book. Random smoke shop in the mall in my hometown. At that point, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I was already drawing on my own in class. I would be young and draw stuff. I was drawing G.I. Joe, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I'd bring them up to the teacher in 5th grade and be like, "Hey, look what I draw! Look what I drew!" I don't know if they really cared, but it's what I love to do. When I picked up comics, I was just like, "Oh, this is perfect." Like, I'm these ideas and stories. Comics, drawings, like this is what I want. So I spent my whole life was just drawing all the time. It was always intrigued. it took a while to get there. I mean, through the years. I mean, I went to art school, went to the Art Institute in Boston. I actually taught a comic book class last year. I had Andrew come by, which I'm actually talking this week to that class. So I did that for a bit. You know, I was wondering about teaching. Teaching's okay, but it's tough when you're trying to balance comics and basically anything else because comics will dominate your life. So you really have to love it. But it's totally worth it. I mean, it's awesome to see your stuff published. It's awesome to reach your goals. It's awesome to talk. If you reach levels of DC and Marvel and stuff, it's really great. It's really great to give it back. You spend so much time in your studio and working. It's nice and stuff like this to talk to other people who maybe have questions or aspirations to do that. One of my favorite things is always going to panels at Comic-Con and stuff, to hear everybody else's stories. It helps out because sometimes it can get really tough trying to break in. You know, I spent years doing it. Like I said, I'm 10 years old, I picked up my first comic. I'll be 35 this year. So it's been a long time. I feel like I'm just kind of getting started. And I spent many years, well, not many years, I spent a handful of years kind of living off peanut butter and jelly and macaroni and cheese to get by. But it was worth it. So here I am, and that's my story.
I'm at Goodwin. I wrote Economics, which is a graphic novel history of the economy. I wrote it and didn't illustrate it. And I got into comics. I mean, I was always a reader. I always loved reading comics, but I got into writing them because I had a story to tell that, you know, no other format would do what I wanted to do. I wanted to take this complicated story and make it as not just clear as possible, but as unimpressive is the wrong word, unintimidating as possible, because it's economics, and you know, as soon as you can write the best book on economics, but a lot of people aren't going to pick it up, that nobody is intimidated by a comic book. And I knew that it was possible to take a complex story and give it well in comics. One of my favorite artists is Larry Gonick, who's done all sorts of nonfiction comics, but his masterwork is a history that goes from the Big Bang to the modern world, and it's just good history as well as being funny and engaging. And so basically, I decided I knew it could be done, and I started on the project basically hoping that I could pull it off. And you know, people tell me I did, so that's nice.
We did.
He tells me. And yeah, so I came at it from a background in writing, and although my father was a cartoonist, he was my stepfather, and I never did inherit the slightest amount of drawing talent. So, you know, I work I collaborate with an artist to get these things done. And that's my story. Thank you.
Anybody want to bring burning desire questions they want to ask? Not all at once. Don't overwhelm them.
In terms of collaborating with writing and drawing, how do you just call someone?
There are. Do you mean how do you find someone, or how do you like get? Well, you find people in any number of ways. There are, you know, generally, paying up front is a big one. You know, you call someone up and say, hey, you know, we can split the payments that I may someday get for this project. They're not going to be interested, but you know, some kind of upfront payment, and you just, you find some names. You go to a comic shop, you find comics that have a look that you like. I went through a lot of artists who did. There was a whole series called The Big Book of This, The Big Book of Death, The Big Book of the 70s, and they had a lot of, generally one writer or two writers and a whole lot of different artists for different articles. And so I got a wide range of people who work in, you know, who do nonfiction comics. Because a lot of people, you know, you look at their work and most of their work might be superheroes, and you don't know that they can also do like completely other things. And so I just started writing them, and then they'll say, oh no, I'm not free, but this guy might be good. And people are very generous, and the guy I found out I finally wound up working with, I'd heard of him through a couple of people, and then my agents knew him, and he was one of several people who gave samples for the book, like just one page, just to show the publisher. And his was so much better than anybody else's, and it's not that he puts my vision on the page, because that's not possible, but he puts his vision on the page, and it just happens to be exactly the same as mine. So it really, it really is like seeing what I had in my head on the page, which is wonderful. And as far as working with him, there are like just the actual mechanics of it. There are a million ways to do that. There's like Spider-Man. At Marvel, famously, the writer would sketch out the plot. The artist would put the panels together, put the pages together, and then the writer would go and figure out what everyone was saying in the art, depending on the art. But I tend to be much more. I send like panel by panel. Panel 1, Adam Smith is jumping up and down, angry. Smith says this. I tend to be much more exact about that, just because what I'm doing is sort of scholarly, and it can be. There are a million ways to get something wrong if you don't know the background of the actual scholarship. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Go for it. No, I was going to say the rest of the panel.
Yeah, there's, I think probably the best place to get started is there are a handful of websites that are specifically for freelance people looking for work. Like Behance is one, there's also, but I'd say your best bet, because there's a wide variety of people anywhere across the world, and just even, any age, there's a website called DeviantArt. I always used to like to go to like artists that I really like their style, and then you can see what it is that they like, and you can find artists you've heard of anywhere, all over, the country, and find them, and you can literally send them private messages to see where they're at in terms of taking on work or whatever. The other fun thing for finding new stuff is websites like Tumblr. There's a lot of Tumblr blogs or whatever, where they're not even putting in original material. They're just collecting pieces from people, and so they're constantly, you just flip through and they'll just put some French artist or whatever, comic artist, and there'll be 5 pieces of them, and so it's just miles of feed of artists that you probably never heard of that are amazing, and then you find their homes on the internet. To start.
Yeah, that's it. Again, DeviantArt is a great place. That's where I think I got contacted most. Like for an artist perspective, I had gotten contacted by handfuls of people over the years, asking if they got interested in working on their books. A lot of it was like, yeah, there's no pay. So a lot of that stuff, you kind of, it's up to you whether you want to choose to do that stuff or not. You might want to take 1 or 2, but I don't recommend going to trades with that. But so that I had my stuff on a platform that someone else could look and say, okay, here's this guy's stuff. It might be good for my book. I'll send them a message. And you just meet people that way. And nowadays with Twitter and everything, Tumblr is a great. You just get in contact with people so fast. As long as you have something out there, whether you guys are artists or writers, so some sort of public platform that someone can check out randomly. You never know, and it's always random stuff. You can try and push your stuff on, whether it's a publisher people websites, it doesn't matter. I just feel like, in my experience at least, it's just random stuff. Just one day, I don't know how people found me or what brought them, over my stuff. But next thing you know, you get an email, you get a deal, and that's it. So you just never know.
So if you're beginning, you've never done something like this before, either from the writer or the artist point of view. Like finding somebody, you can find somebody who, like, I like their art, they love trying to work together, but the whole legality, because the freelancer, how do you know what's a good deal and how to figure out what they pay them and what the copyright? How does that all get figured out if you don't have an agent or lawyer?
Well, if someone's upfront, they usually, like, if someone's usually upfront and honest, it should be something you cover immediately. Like, in my opinion, in a lot of people's opinion, it's being more popular. In terms of property, it really should be split, especially if you have characters. Like, I don't know how it works in nonfiction so much, but if you're working in fiction, it really should be 50-50 between artist and writer, because the artist is inventing the look of the character. That's part of the intellectual property. If it was ever option for a movie, or something vaguely referencing the material. And if someone's getting a game for a little bit, they'll usually say that first sentence. Like, if someone wants to start a new project with me or something, like, hey, like, I had some time open there this year, you want to do something 50-50, of course. Now let's start with the project. You know what I mean? Like, that's part of respect. In terms of just straight up freelance work for hire stuff, it's usually like a per page rate. But you gotta set it yourself, but you should be honest and just think, well, how long does it take me to do a page? You know what I mean? Like, for me, it takes me, a day, 2 days and a half to do every page. So if I'm like, oh, I'll do it for $30, I'm screwing myself over big time. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to say no to something exciting and fun, but trying to make a living, yeah. Or the other thing is, if you're a writer or whatever, and you're trying to start out, and you're like, well, how can I? Who as an artist can afford to pay? I don't know. I would never be able to afford that. But some do, and one of the options is if you don't have the money, you're starting out, and they're an artist who is not paid, you can always do things like Kickstarters now. So, if you do a Kickstarter.com, you guys can get together, make a pitch, tell your friends, ask your friends to pass it along, and then you can afford to pay them. You get a real product from them.
Yeah, I was talking very glibly about paying up front. When I started this whole process, I had savings, and keyword is had.
Well, on that note, I think my advice on that, if you could talk about money-wise, like, if you're ever going to start freelancing in any genre, like, someone told me this years ago, and I didn't do it, is to have, I would say, 15 to 20 grand saved up, because you will need it, and you will blow through all of most of it. Unless you're really lucky and you get some great work, whatever, as a general rule, I would say 15, 20 grand.
You mean before you start trying to work?
Before, yeah.
Almost at any given time, I'd say, because there are times when the phone's just not going to ring, and you have to be able to live through those times.
Or you need to get married. To someone that has a different job.
Yeah, an extremely wealthy one.
So now that there are so many different competitors, do you think, not really so much competitors like as, say, other artists that are on DeviantArt and all these websites, do you think it's harder to get, say, your name out there now that there are so many things and to be able to get done, and you can get a Kickstarter real quick? It's not like you have to bring all your work, in a portfolio per se. I'm sure you do, but like, there's just so much on the internet compared to even 10, 15 years ago. Do you think that's made a difference as far as to be able to secure a higher position, or or is it just kind of luck of the draw? Somebody likes you, somebody calls you, somebody finds your stuff on the internet. What is like?
Well, I think it's fierce. I don't know how you guys view it. I think the internet and DeviantArt, I think, makes it's a great platform to get yourself out there. In theory, whereas 10 or 15 years ago, I remember just always mailing stuff. mailing submissions. Like there was no like DeviantArt or anything, so you just had to like blindly mail something in the envelope in the mail. You know, you wait for a rejection letter from RBDC, whatever. So in a sense, I think the internet and all this stuff is great because you can get it out there to a lot more eyes. But the balance of that is that there's a ton more people who do the same thing. So I think it is a little bit more difficult to stand out. But it's sort of like push and pull where like, yeah, it's tough to stand out in such a crowd, but at least you're out there with everybody else, and people are looking through the pile of artists.
Yeah, and it's like the internet's like a free market for attention. Do you mean it's free to use, Twitter, Facebook? I would recommend using every home that you can, Instagram or whatever. You take a photo of your title of your book on your anything that can, get it up there. So, but because it's like a free market, the cream rises to the top. People like to share on the internet, and if they like what you're doing, they share it. They don't even tell their friends; they tell their followers, which is bigger. All they have to click is reblog. There's another 2,000 people who saw yours who didn't even have to look for it. Just, if you're doing something people like, it'll happen. And also, like you're saying, back in the day without the internet, mailing submissions and stuff, it kind of worked the same way for just like shopping and everything. Odds are, in a comic shop or the stand at a grocery store, there was only going to be Marvel and DC, so that's what all the Thought comics could be. With the internet, people who aren't interested in superheroes or whatever, those people can now find those comics that are unique and different styles and everything. So it's someone who probably couldn't have a career. It's not even a question. They could not have a career in superheroes. They not have a career because people do actively look for these, types of just one illustration.
There are several comics that started out on the web, just out there to see if people liked it, and since gotten books, and in some cases the creators have done quite well, and you would not necessarily think that Marvel or DC would have greenlighted a stick figure comic about Dungeons and Dragons, but it turns out it's a really good stick figure comic about Dungeons and Dragons, and so it's the guy does very well with it.
For an artist starting out, what would you say to someone about strengthening portfolio? Like, what pieces of work should I would work on to get myself to the point where you're?
I guess the first thing would be for you particularly, like, are you doing sequential art? First of all, are you doing superheroes? Are you doing fantasy? Something else?
Well, I'm a student at NSCC in Boston, and I'm still kind of figuring out what's my specialty. And recently this year, I've been getting into graphic novels and comic books and all that. And I've read all the Scott McCloud books and all that. And right now, I'm just trying to figure out how to get into the comic book world and the graphic novel world and the things I need to work on.
Yeah, well, that's exactly where I was years ago. My advice, number one, is to focus on storytelling. Do the sequential art. Don't do pinups. Don't do covers. Don't do just like one picture of a thing. Like get the panels going. Like tell a story. It doesn't really matter, I guess, what genre. I mean, that only comes down to what you're interested in. Like, if you want to work for Marvel or DC, then like do superhero stuff. If you don't, that's no problem. Do fantasy stuff, do real world stuff. It depends on if you want to go to Image or any of these other guys. There's plenty of genres now. You don't have to stick to the case stuff. So do the sequential art. Make sure you're telling a story. Those guys want to see your ability to tell a story. Like, you can do an awesome cover, you can do an awesome film, it doesn't matter. They don't even care. Like, they want to see your ability to tell a story through pages. Generally, they want to, I would suggest 3 to 5 pages in one sequence of a story. And vary that up, because your portfolio on the whole should have about 10 to 12 pieces. So if you included like, 2 or maybe 3, depending how you want to push it, of sequences of stories, maybe switch it up a little bit, maybe do some stuff that's like interior stuff, exteriors, landscapes, buildings. Make sure you have a lot of like faces in there, work on the anatomy. Those are like the big ones that I think you'll be judged on most. And again, just cater those ideas to whatever genres that you're comfortable with working.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, certainly sequential pages. I think that's all we really want to see. Also, a handful of the websites under like submissions, they like image. They're pretty generous with helping you pitch to them or whatever. You can find like sample scripts, so then you don't have to write something yourself. You know that you're starting from source material. It's strictly professional. So I want to say Image has a sample script, and I think Dark Horse might. Hell, you can probably just Google comic sample script, and you can find something that was written by, some of the best writers in the industry from years ago until today or whatever, and you can see. And then you can get accustomed to how a nice script is written and everything too. So it's good practice. I wouldn't shy away from backgrounds. Actually, I wouldn't shy away from anything. If it's hard, you should probably just draw it. Like, yeah, and just draw as much as you can. Like, you'd be surprised, how much you can improve even in your own eyes just by doing not much more than drawing, like just drawing constantly. And I mean, sometimes if something's difficult, I'm not looking forward to that. I'll like intentionally do it at a weird angle or something just because it's harder, and then it literally isn't so hard next time. And then the more you do it, I don't know. I just never shy away from it because it's so easy to take the easy way out. I think overall your work suffers. But yeah, certainly actual pages with it.
And the other thing too, touching on your the idea of going to websites, because most publishers have a submissions something or other on their website, and you click on that, they'll often provide a script, and they'll have an email where you can send your stuff to. They'll get through it eventually. Sometimes they're quick, sometimes it takes a long time. The other thing, which is really great, is to go to conventions and go to portfolio reviews. Those are awesome because you will meet the actual editors of these publishers. They will look at your work and give you like the best scripts, the best opinion on your stuff. Hopefully you get their business cards, so you have their email, and you start establishing contacts. And they're usually very nice, and you can keep sending your stuff to them. That's what I did, I just keep sending it. They're more than happy, for the most part, to give you a nice critique via email and stuff. And that's like the perfect way to start building a relationship with these people. They'll recognize your name, like if you go and meet them later on in places, and like, oh yeah, you're Robert Gill, yeah, I remember you, like, hey, what's up, and that goes a huge, long way in this stuff, especially when you have so many people competing for only so many jobs. So anything you get like up on people, get to know people in the industry, you need to do.
You must be able to do things in different formats, right? Do you just do paper format, or do you do digital format? Do you do like on television you see comics that kids watch on television? Do you do various, or do you just do paper?
I myself, I'm on paper. I don't do anything digitally yet. I think maybe someday I might, but right now for me, like I love the actual like paper, pen and pencil, like ink, nibs, brushes, boom. It's what I can do.
Yeah, it's a good amount of its preference, and then also your job, whatever the gig is too. Some places have very specific styles, whatever. Like I'm with them, I like the old school feel of, a can't imagine going digital, but I think we're kind of starting to be in the minority. I know a lot of schools are really kind of pushing digital art. You know, I like the smell of ink. You know, I like the texture. You know, but then at the same time, we go and scan our work, so then it becomes digital. And, at some point it gets digital. All my colors are digital. You know, most of the time they're letters and blues and everything. And capture boxes are digital, so or even sound effects. So
You must be one of like 3 people that hand letter stuff.
I did it. It took forever. Yeah, I was hand lettering. I still do my sound effects by hand. There was a project I had a tight deadline on late last year, and I was like, yeah, why don't you get this letter for me? And I was shaving off like 6 hours of per page. I was like, oh shit, that takes a long time. So that's all digital for me now too. But this stuff's fun. If you have the time for it.
What are you currently reading for inspiration or fun as a break from working? As far as comics go.
I've been recently reading, there's a French artist named Goodwin. He writes travelogues. His wife is, I believe, a diplomat, and he just winds up in Jerusalem, and then he's in Pyongyang. And I've been reading his comics account of a few years in Jerusalem. It's fascinating stuff. And just, you know, the great thing about working in comics is you really do have to cut it down to the essence. You know, if I had written my book just in prose, it would be around 80,000 pages now, and I would be done with it. But because it was a comic, I just had to cut it down, and he's a real master at that. Every panel is revealing in like 5 different ways, without hitting you over the head with it. And so I've only read Jerusalem, but I definitely want to read everything else he's got.
I myself, as far as comics go, like I've been reading the Saga stuff from Image, Black Science that's recently out there. I'm also picking up right now. Actually reading a book, it's a collection of Sergio Tappi's work. He's Italian, pretty sure. His stuff's pretty mind blowing. So I'm working through that now. I just got through a beautiful, like a huge collection of, it's not really book to read, but collection of Norman Rockwell stuff of all Saturday Evening Post covers. This is amazing. So I mean, I try to go out and find any books by some of my favorite artists. It's a lot of going back to stuff that even maybe I had when I was growing up. I don't have anymore. Catching up books like Preacher, Why the Last Man. I don't know what else. There's not much. As much as I do work for DC and stuff like that, I don't really read too many books on the Super Marvel DC stuff. I guess it is what it is. So I tend to try to gravitate more toward the Image. Image has this amazing stuff right now, and then even going back, looking to more finer artists for inspiration. I don't know if you guys recently actually had the Sargent watercolor exhibit at Museum of Science was there a while back. It was incredible, and that's fantastic inspiration for me and stuff. So I like to try to get lots of different stuff going. Try to keep things fresh when I have the time to read, which is not a whole lot.
I don't read a lot of comics anymore. I kind of go through phases. I haven't returned in a while. I've been reading the Game of Thrones books, Song of Ice and Fire. I've been reading Sword of Storm, or Storm Swords book right now, which is awesome. But I always keep up with Hellboy. Hellboy's my favorite comic. And I always return to Lone Wolf and Cub, which is a classic manga from the 70s. It's a samurai book. Recently particularly for the art, I'm kind of behind on all the market stuff. Brandon does progress, so I've been kind of trying to get into that. And I've never been much of a manga reader because it's just not for me. But I really love the anime Tekken Creep, so I bought the manga that that's based on. And I'm looking forward to starting the Akira series. Again, the movie was awesome, and the art in that was amazing. And then I'm just started battling Boy 2. So I say I don't read comics, but they're basically like on the back of the toilet usually. When I actually sit down to read, it's usually a novel.
You read the Appleseed stuff?
I haven't. It's been recommended.
That stuff.
I haven't.
That stuff is awesome.
Is it? It's just so much of the anime. It's just awful. I feel like I just don't. It's just too weird for me, or I don't relate to it, or whatever. But the ones that are good are some of the best stuff. So I'm thinking maybe manga might be the same. So I'm trying to get into some.
Other
How do you come up with honest fiction? Because in fiction, because you have a character, emotions, those things.
Well,
Readers emotion, but the voices.
Well, I try to stick to the facts. I don't convert it to fiction. I try to convert it to a narrative, but it's a nonfiction narrative. And my inspiration is one of my inspirations is Larry Gonick, who's his cartoon history of the universe, and his way of doing things was you'll have the narration, which is sometimes a little Larry Gonick character talking, and sometimes just narration. And the narration is pretty. If you just took that from the book, it would be a well-written, very dense history book with a couple of jokes in it. That's it. Just fact. And then so you've got the sort of straight narration, and then whatever's going on in the panel is illustrating that, but then you can be creative. Then you can put words into people's mouths. Then you can have, Karl Marx jumping up and down on a pile of books, which he never actually did as far as I know. But he's figuratively he did it. So you've got you can play more with what's going on in the images than what's going on in the narration, that I think. And one thing that I did also was I set off direct quotes. They're italicized, and they're not just in quotes, but they're italicized, so you can see like this is a direct quote. And then anything else is just me playing around with stuff. So you've got sort of a nonfiction narration, and then what the actual image panel by panel is fiction. Does that answer your question? Oh.
I'll throw one out. So in the realm of comics, who individuals or teams or what have you, who's kind of had the most influence on the kind of work that you do? I'm guessing Larry Gonick is
not a bad guess.
Right, but it doesn't just have to be one person, but who are some of the people that come to mind when you think of what sent you down the path of comics, or kind of when you're looking to aspire to comic greatness? Who comes to mind, or who's really set you down that path?
Well, for me, aside from Gonick, there's Scott McCloud, who did what I think was really the first scholarly, like original work of scholarship in comics, which is understanding comics, which is an explanation of comics as an art form, using comics, and it's just brilliant. And aside from that, it's basically anybody who told a clear story. I mean, my father, my stepfather, again, he's a cartoonist, and he, you know, comics got respect in our household back when, you know, a lot of the culture, there was much more of a stigma. And so, you know, he was always pointing out which of the reprinted Donald Duck stories were by Karl Barks and which were not by Karl Barks, and why Karl Barks's were like 20 times better, both in the art and in the storytelling. And you know, then there's the other name that jumps to mind is the comic American Splendor by Harvey Pekar, who's just, you know, he takes everyday life, he takes things, usually things that you don't even notice in your own life. If someone asked you what happened today, you'd say nothing. And he makes a comic about it, and it's great. And it's engaging and brilliant and often quite funny, and just, sometimes you can't even describe why. And that's one big, it's an inspiration in the sense that it inspires me someday to be that good where I could actually do that, because I'm not anywhere near that now.
For me, yeah, for the artists that come to mind, top three, I always say Travis Charest, Chris Backlow, Lean Liu. Those guys, you know, over the years, just continue to blow me away. I'm always trying to get my stuff, you know, somewhat on that level. You know, there's a lot of different styles in comics. It's sometimes hard to necessarily decide on one for yourself or whatever. But it's nice to pick and choose what different guys are doing. Because, you know, some of the other greats for me, like, you know, Tom Cronin, Joe Madureira, Eric Larson, there's so many guys that did so many books that I read growing up. And I love, you know, picking things out, because, you know, I don't always love what they all do, but they did this really cool, this cool, and that cool, you know. Let myself be influenced by that, try to get my own work up to those levels. So, always going back to their books. I think it's important to revisit your inspirations. You know, don't just take a book and read it once. You know, it's great, and then you'll read it again. Like, read them, you know, every couple of years, or even sooner. Read them every year, once a year, doesn't matter. Like, you got to keep yourself fresh. You got to keep inspired. It's tough. You can feel really great for a little while, and you kind of maybe lose steam a bit, and need some injection of stuff. So, always recommend just always keep your influences in mind, and just be always looking again and again at stuff. You can always find different stuff that you never noticed before too, as a rich past. So I always love that process.
For me, as a kid, it was probably, in hindsight, because I don't really good at making the comics as a kid. It was probably Frank Miller and John Romita Jr. and Todd McFarlane. But then as an adult, definitely Mike Mignola, Hellboy, Gabriel Bob. It's done, like, particularly on Umbrella Academy. Raphael Grandpa, Toby Cypress, who's lesser known, unfortunately. Jeff Smith, Bone. So what else? Generally, I like a lot of things that are really style based. I don't really get into a lot of the more Marvel DC types. I like shapes. How they kind of relate with each other, and things like that. So anything that's, I guess, kind of expressive stuff. I like simple things. That's a pretty good list, I guess.
So I wasn't here at the very, very beginning, so you might have touched on this, but I was curious about educational background and where you may have gone to college, and if there was any inspiration during those college years, and maybe even what majors you took.
was a Chinese studies major, it really had no perceptible effect on my career path at all. That's all I got.
What could you add to that?
Well, like I mentioned, I went to the Art Institute of Boston for 4 years. That was great. I mean, I pretty much tailored that in all those classes to comics as much as I could. I mean, they offer plenty of illustration stuff. They had a comic book class. So anything I could do to help myself out on that level was I did. Before that, I mean, you know, in high school I just took as many art classes as I could. But I mean, aside from like the actual like Art Institute of Boston education, there was no other formal training for this. It was just me with an idea like I wanted to do comics, so I just read thousands of comics. I had thousands of comics in my parents' basement, and that was just I just emulated as much as I could from that.
Yeah, I similar to Mike really. I went to Berkeley, so I learned music. My degree's in songwriting, which is not helpful for comics. I always drew constantly as a kid, and I only decided not to be a comic artist for the brief period where I wanted to be a rock star. And then as I learned more and more about music, I kind of was getting tired of it. It started to feel, I learned so much music in books, you listening to music kind of started to feel like that. So I would take a break from all that stuff when I draw, and then I was finding some of the creators that I now love at the time, and just made me love comics more, and then I didn't want to stop, and I would say I put music on the back burner, but I don't even touch a guitar anymore. I don't care in the slightest anymore. Yeah, I mean, same as Rob, there's a lot to be said about just looking at a lot of stuff and emulate, what do we say, fake it till you make it, like emulate until all of a sudden you think, oh shit, I'm doing something unique. When did that happen?
I know nothing about this field, but it interested me when you were talking about the Donald Brown comic books and the difference that you so probably mentioned in the two earlier. And I was wondering what the artist did to make that his particular work outstanding. What were some of the things that you remember that were pointed out to you, or what are some things that you think differentiates the mediocre from the excellent?
Well, for Karl Barks's Donald Duck comic specifically, I'm not sure that I can articulate it because it's so much, my perceptions were, I was reading these when I was 8. But he was, other artists, the things would just be wrong. The expression on a duck's face would be wrong. The way, the way a story played out would be dull, and Karl Barks would be fascinating. He wrote epics. They would find King Solomon's mines. They would do all these amazing things, and other artists and writers, it just wasn't there. And so, from my child's perspective, when you're a kid, you think all these things are actually quite easy, and so Karl Barks was doing it right, and all these other people were inexplicably getting it wrong in subtle ways that I could even as a kid I could sort of pick up on, if that answers your question.
And how about now? Are these artists whom you admire and emulate, are there particular things that they're doing that are particularly creative and original that you think make them stand out?
For me, it's always the ability to combine good, in nonfiction comics, good information with engagingness and hopefully humor. And when you do it right, it's all three work together really well. you sort of know, you can sit there and you write 20 pages on a subject, and then you get it down to 10, and then you get it down to 2 panels, and then you get it down to 1 panel, and you know if you got that 1 panel right. And there are creators who can do that, unfortunately, late Robert Gill, who's they just once you've actually tried to do it yourself, I'm in awe of how he can just get 1 panel so right.
For Robert, favorite DC?
Batman.
Least favorite?
Least favorite?
Yeah.
You don't know why
To be honest, Joker's daughter. I don't know what they're thinking with it. There's probably worse, but that's just the first one. I was having a conversation with my buddy the other day. He texted me and he's like, "What is this Joker's daughter shit?" I'm like, I don't know.
Over the past 10 years, we've seen like all of the comic books, like the original ones, like being turned into movies and like returned and stuff. Like Spider-Man's on their 2nd one, Batman's about to do another trilogy. Just like, how do you feel that like influences like the comic book industry, or has it changed your perception on like the old like Superman and Batman and all of those?
I mean, for in the long run, I think it can only benefit the industry.
Yeah.
It's only going to bring more attention to the comics in general. I mean, as a fan, I usually don't really enjoy them too much, but they're not for me.
Yeah.
And the way I see it too is like when Tim Burton did Batman with Michael Keaton, I was a kid, and it was awesome. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was awesome. Like, I was a kid, so I loved it. And if all these movies and the love for these characters and these properties brings more kids to the industry, I think it's great. And also, I mean, not to get like too into it or whatever, but we're seeing, especially like he was mentioning, Image Comics has a ton of great titles that are really successful right now. That's really great to see comics, people getting excited about comics that aren't Batman, aren't Superman. And I just imagine all the kids who are really excited about Avengers or Captain America or whatever, getting into comics, reading Avengers, Captain America, eventually stumbling upon these Image Comics and stuff, And they're 10 right now, so we're talking even just 10 years from now, we have new people who are inspired by all these great new comics that are brand new now and blowing up. And they're going to create stuff that's even better. And we're going to hopefully see a market that's beyond just streamers, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
I feel like in the whole, it's great. Rather than the comics just dwindling until the fire goes out. We all, freak out about it.
Yeah, I think the movies have definitely brought a nice, I don't know, rejuvenation to comics to some extent. I personally don't like most of the movies. I think they're ridiculous. But they get people into it. They get people in the stores, and they read Marvel books for a while. They jump over to Image and find stuff that's great. That's probably all what we do. I mean, it was always Marvel at first for me, and I did it for years, and then kind of got over. I mean, Image didn't exist yet. I remember when Image first started, they launched Spawn and all that stuff, and I loved it. I bought all that shit. But I mean, before that, it was all superheroes, and then I think after time, you kind of maybe outgrew superheroes to a point, and I still read them.
Not everybody.
For a little bit. But not everybody. But again, I think the movies are a good thing for the industry. I think a lot of movies are not good, but that's my.
But then again, The Dark Knight is really bad.
The third movie?
With Bane? I liked all 3.
It's the worst. Bane's voice, that was okay with you?
I'll school with that. I'll take it. Actually, Batman's voice is worse than Bane's.
It is the worst. I didn't like that.
I'll watch any of the movies, even if I'm watching it knowing that it's not like good as a movie. I still, I'll watch it.
Did you guys know Dax?
I didn't know.
Yeah, I did.
Can you repeat that? I couldn't hear that.
She was asking if they went to PAX, which is essentially a video game, right? Yeah, / pop culture / almost anything else convention that was happened this past weekend, and they didn't, which was disappointing.
I was trying to get away from video games. They get a little addicting. When you get deadlines, and you try and you have with $200 invested in Skyrim, you have to make decisions.
So I'll throw this one up. Some of you have touched upon it, but so why comics as your form for art, as your form for expression? There's numerous other ways of communicating or storytelling. Why comics?
I have no idea.
Honest answer.
Yeah, I just always, I love it as a medium. And like I said, I don't even read that many anymore, but there's something about it that's just, maybe it's because it's like older, it's been around, and when you get a real good one, there's something it's not film, it's not, novels, it's just, they can be really magic. And there's just like the type of illustration, just the styles of illustration that you really don't see in comics, and those are the kind of what I really gravitate to. So that's as close as I can come to saying why,
Yeah, for me, I mean, just the basic, for me, I had this thing when I was younger, I could draw stuff, I wanted to tell stories, so you find comics, it's like, well, here it is, like, you can draw and tell stories, so it's just like, okay, bam. And I mean, obviously there are other formats, you can do the same thing, but as an illustrator, as an artist, you get to sit there and do your drawing thing, and if you have a writing, because I like to write my own stuff too, and eventually I hope to get my own books out there. It's just like, it seemed to me like just a natural, perfect balance for things. And I just didn't really I've never questioned it. It's just that's it.
For me, I had a story to tell, and part of the story was that this subject that people find so forbidding and complex is not actually that hard when you break it down. And comics was just the medium for that. That's I figured if I could do it in comics, then I was proving my own point. And if I couldn't do it in comics, then maybe I was wrong about that and shouldn't be trying.
I came a bit late, so I'm sorry for eating something that was already said, but I've noticed there's been a lot of autobiographical comics coming out lately, and that seems to be like the new wave thing. And at first, I was kind of bouncing from one to the other and being like, wow, this is really cool. And now it seems like the choice is almost like superhero comics or someone's autobiographical life comics. And they're good, but at the same time, it's kind of becoming the norm for now an artist has to come out with an autobiographical comic or an autobiographical comic about someone they know. So what are your guys' feelings on autobiographical graphic novels?
I think they're wonderful when they're well done, and there's they're not so much anymore, but there used to be this whole thing called journal comics where people would just put up 4 panels on the internet every day, and for whatever reason, because of the format, like I would never read somebody writing 1 paragraph about their life every day unless they were really, really, really good writer. And even then, probably not. But somehow, with the format, just reducing everything to 4 panels, a lot of these people I found it quite interesting. I think you're right in that there's more people who I guess they've looked at. If you look at something like to talk about American Splendor again. If you look at American Splendor and think, oh, hey, this guy just wrote 3 pages about his breakfast, I can do that. Like, well, yes, you can, but you really probably shouldn't until you're much better at your craft. And I think there may be more people just sort of blathering on now. But it's you know, they say write what you know, and autobiography can be in any format, can be really interesting. And so I think, you know, I still like them more often than not. You know, I'll still read them more often than not. To me, the unfortunate ones are still a minority.
Yeah, I have no problem. I mean, I guess I don't read too much. I'm not really aware of a surge of autobiographical books in the market, but maybe I'm just not looking for that when I'm out and about. But I mean, I agree with you. I mean, they're good as long as they're well done. I mean, there's probably a lot of nonsense stuff out there, but that can be said for anything. You know, Blankets is always one of my favorites. That sort of genre thing. But yeah, I mean, that's something that I would like to actually search out more. I mean, I've considered for myself, you know, at some point, maybe down the road, to do something autobiographical. You know, I go back and forth with it, but I mean, I'm sure they're probably extremely cathartic for the individual. It's probably, good or not, everybody should probably do one. Why not? Loss of in life, you know, have to get it out somehow.
Yeah, I don't really read them. The other ones I've read are by Liz Suburbian, just because she's a friend of mine. So, and I really like her art. She's got a really unique style. Yeah, I don't know if I'd recognize the big surge in them. I go to like, I do better at the shows that are kind of arts and fartsy, and there's a lot of them there. So I'm not sure. It's tough for me to tell how popular they are. I mean, generally like SPX, it's really not. You know what I mean? But I think that's part of like the kind of internet culture too. You know what I mean? Where it's that kind of do-it-yourself type of people who almost prefer the comic that's containing staples, you know, is printed off the Xerox staples or whatever. But at the same time, I don't think that's just those or superhero. I mean, it's publishers seem to go that way. Do you know what I mean? It's like Dark Horse, they have a couple superheroes, but I'd say the vast majority are either superhero or autobiographical. And I'd say the same for Image. They do have 4 different superhero books, but just so many books now. I'd still say most of them aren't superhero stuff. I do think they're cool though, you know? I think, especially if you think there's something.
If there has been a surge, it may be just publishers saying, oh my God, we have to make the next Fun Home and Party My Mother. The success of those 2 Alison Bechdel books are, you know, that must have gotten the attention of a whole lot of people.
You know, maybe they're just more visible now. The internet has really changed the game.
So what are some of the more interesting experiences or reactions you've had when just telling people you work in comics in some capacity?
It's usually embarrassing.
I saw the flyer in the library and I was like, what? DC? I was like, no. I was like freaking out.
Well, I mean, what do you call yourself? First of all, people don't know. Some people will be like, hey, what do you do for a living? I just call myself a cartoonist now because that's like a traditional term or whatever. But like, oh, I draw comics, and be like, so are you unemployed? Fuck you. Or they just look at you like you're just weird or like not really or something. Like I had one person kind of snicker and he's like, so are they comics or are they graphic novels? Like, that's the same thing. There's no difference, you know. And I don't know. I usually try to change the subject. I'm usually like, oh, I'm a cartoonist. Like, I like the boys, draw comic books. So what did you say you do? You're a dentist or something, you know? It's usually awkward.
No, it's true. Most people don't know what the hell I'm talking about. If they say, oh, what do you do? I draw comics. Sometimes I'm an illustrator. Sometimes they go with Illustrator. They kind of have an idea, but then if they have, what do you do? Like,
children's books or something.
Yeah, same thing. Comic books, graphic novels. Like, again, I just try to just, you know, move on. but even my own thing, like, I remember my mother, when I bought like my first graphic novel, like she thought it was like a graphic novel, like porno or something.
Wait, it wasn't.
That one, not that one. So I mean, yeah, it's really interesting when you start talking about it. I mean, it gets a little bit interesting too. If you're like me and they know you did something for DC, or you're doing some of that level or Transformers, and then they get a little bit more excited, but they still don't know what the hell they're talking about. So it's like, yeah, just go back row or whatever. And so like, how's the weather?
Yeah, and unless you're working for DC, like they've never heard of it. You know what I mean? So
well, that's the other thing too.
It's derailing the conversation.
Yeah, I mean that's the only reason you started with DC and stuff. But I've been doing this for a good handful of years, and like everything pretty much before that, like no. So I mean, even if you had a good run, well, any of the stuff I do, like you talk about it, looks like, and then like, but when you start to do something recognizable, then all of a sudden something goes off and they burn it, and it's just like, and it's like I've been doing this for years, the same thing, just a different title, but it's just kind of. That's the interesting thing, and I think I always get annoyed if they call me a cartoonist, because I just feel like it's something else. And the other thing, and I keep going, people will always think I work for Disney, or that I want to work for Disney, like that's my thing. I'm like, no. So, it's just interesting.
We were talking before the show about how, the comic Watchmen, which is as complex and subtle a work of fiction as anything, came out in '86, Mouse came out in '91, Understanding Comics came, which really made the case for comics as an art form, came out not long after. And there's still a stigma attached. There's still this idea that you're somehow drawn to working in kiddie stuff. And for me, the response has changed when I tell people what I do based on how they think on what they think of the kiddie stuff, of the fact that I work in kiddie stuff. So when I would first tell people that I was doing this comic book explaining the economy, that was, I've been working on it for a long time, so that was like late 90s, even early 2000s. And back then everybody except me thought that the economy was under control and we knew everything, so they'd just be like, why? Why are you bothering? And then, now, and this changed around 2005, 2006, I'd start to tell people and they wouldn't back away and they'd be like, oh, I'd actually be interested in reading that, thinking that I was talking about something dumbed down to kiddie level because it's comics. And it's not, there is still that idea out there, and I'm actually surprised because, if you looked in 1995 at all the comics that have come out and their success, you'd probably think, yeah, in 20 years, like these are going to be completely mainstream, and they're still not.
Yeah, I still think there's a pretty strong stigma in our comics. Just because, in reality, there's so many different kinds of comics. I think there's at least a comic for, and there's so many different kinds. And still, people just don't know that. Whatever. It's an obstacle to working in, certainly. But, you don't do it for money. Certainly.
So in your work thus far with working with different editors and different companies and things like that, have you experienced any kind of either direct censorship or just editorial walls, so to speak, around something that you wanted to do or some way you wanted to portray something or around the work that you're doing?
I think it depends on who you're working with. If you're working with a property that they own, or have a license to, they're going to get, a crazy bad. For instance, if you are drawing Conan, you're drawing a comic for Dark Horse Comics, but then there's other people who own Conan. So you've got a lot of people to go through. Even your editors might be, get on nerves or whatever. whatever decisions you're making, but then they need another approval, you know, further up. I don't really work in that stuff personally. Like I own properties at work, I own. And though editors will tell me, like, oh, we're giving you these as, you know, that these are, our notes are for you to consider, you know. You can choose not to go with it, but it still makes you feel like, I feel like they're trying to kill your baby or something sometimes. It's just like, what? You're missing the point, you know what I mean? Like, if I do that, this whole scene is shot, you know? And, but at the same time, you're like, well, you're an editor, if I don't do this, is this book going to be awful? You know what I mean? So, for me personally, especially if it's when I have the luxury of writing and drawing it, it can be pretty stressful, you know, like, you know, I've never had a bad experience with an editor being someone I don't trust or them being cruel or mean or insensitive or something. But if you write it and then you draw it, you've had a very particular vision for it for a very long time. And when up to the final moment they want to change even a small thing, that's not the book. That is mine. It's not my book. You know, especially, you know, they're trying to make books that'll sell. I mean, they're literally investing in you, and they need to, and literally money. They're investing a lot of money, and they're trying to recoup their costs. And so, you want to do something that might go against what they think will recoup costs, you're kind of in an awkward place, you know, especially if you're particular enough. Like, I read a note this morning that he wants me to change some of the colors of my speech bubbles. I don't want to, you know, when I try to do a baby, I'm like, tell my wife, all I say, he wants this, he wants this, he wants what? Defeats the whole purpose, and I get like, so like upset, and then I gotta like, realize I have to just sit and not respond, and let it sink in, think about it, you know, get in here, and then, you know, put my foot down. It's gonna be tough.
Yeah, I mean,
No, I was saying, but that's the way it is. If you have an editor.
yeah, I mean, I've worked with plenty of editors. I've never had a bad experience with an editor at all, but they definitely will tell you what to do if you don't do it right. I think I'm fortunate to have pretty much a nice level of creative freedom with the stuff I do, but I've definitely gotten, you know, notes and told to change this, change that. Especially again when you mentioned Conan and Transformers, the Transformers have to be a certain way, Batgirl has to be a certain way. It's funny because you know, it's something as small as like I made Batgirl's lips mostly black, and they don't want that because DC thinks that if you make Batgirl's lips black, she looks older. And they don't want that. They want to keep her young. So you get little stuff like that. I've turned in pages, covers, whatever, fully aged, all said and done. Sure, they approve it. 2 weeks later, I have to change something. I have to do a patch, they call it. Patch a panel, change the panel, like get this out, add this in. Like that's a pain in the ass because you've already moved on. You're on so you only have so much time today. Then you get this email out of nowhere that you have to go back and then take out a panel.
Real income, real paper.
Yeah, it's, you know, I'm doing everything right there too, so I have to either, and I'm not good with Photoshop, I don't really care about computers. I'm finagle a little bit, but a lot of stuff, you know, you just have to take another piece of Bristol, draw another panel entirely, put it over it, scan it in, get in there, new file, send it back. They usually want them pretty quick too, so you gotta put down whatever the heck you're doing, do that, get back to the stuff you're doing, and it gets a little crazy in that. But that's just part of it. If you want to work for DC, you want to do this stuff, you just have to take it as it is. You got to have a little bit tougher skin for it, so that you don't get personally offended by it. You know, plenty of guys do. I mean, I still get a little annoyed if I have to change something. Like, I spent, even today, I turned in a cover to Valiant today, and I got an email on the way over here that I have to change Exo Manowar's pose to look more whatever. And I'm like, fucking spent 3 hours on that pose, and now I gotta change it. So, okay, I didn't need it yet, but I gotta do that this afternoon, so it's like, alright, whatever.
I only have the one experience with my one book so far, and I really liked my editor, and I thought she was very good. My complaint was that the comments would come, late. So, like, wow, you're really right about that page. I wish I had already had the artist go ahead and make it. But there's never been any particular censorship, which I was actually surprised at, because my book is very political, and I sort of expected them to say, no, you got to tone the politics down, and they really didn't. So I was pleasantly surprised that way.
Yeah, I'd say the closest thing I ever got to something that was like censorship was doing something in an anthology. Did something in Dark Horse Presents, and I just want that book to be like, like a rating of like 14 plus or something. And it was a lot of that stuff's I like Quentin Tarantino, so but stuff, and they were just characters and they're a little foul mouthed, so and I was honestly, if there's too many swears, it starts to take away from the quality of the writing, so I thought in that case taking on improved it, so
One last question.
Okay.
You good? You're on the spot.
When Scott McCloud was doing his making comics store, I got to see him at Northeastern, and at the end of his, he gave like a presentation of slideshows. And at the end, he kind of left being this. It ended with him kind of making a point to say that, like, oh, comics are online now. We all have to go make comics online because that's where you're going to have success. And then just a couple months ago, I was listening to Craig Thomas, who talk about comics now, and he had like the opposite opinion, where he was like, comics we're kind of moving out of, they're no longer relevant compared to movies and different media. And so now they're kind of becoming their own like classic media. And he's like, and he compared them to opera and ballet, and how like it's a kind of a stretch, but he's like how people are going to start looking at it and being like, wow, this is this hand-drawn, piece of artwork, and really appreciate it for the artwork. So do you land on one side or the other? Do you land somewhere in the middle? Where do you think comics would go?
Well, for me, I think, just in my experience, I read, like, pretty much all the comics I read are on the net. There's something, and as I said earlier, a lot of comics have gotten attention and gone on to be quite successful from just some guy putting it up on the internet. For whatever reason, and I think a lot of other people will read a comic on the internet where I wouldn't read a large block of writing. If you put your novel on the internet, I'm not going to read it. I'm sorry, it could be the best novel ever. But there's just something more accessible about comics. That said, if you've read Reinventing Comics, which is the book in between Scott McCloud's other book, he just loves him some technology, and he's already in this science fiction world that is we're not there or anywhere close. So I think that there's still a real place for printed actual comics. I also think that they're very much at home on the internet, and so they're not going, as quite possibly the printed book may, it may actually start to become a classic thing like opera or whatever. But I think comics will actually make the transition better than some other printed art forms.
I'm a pretty anti-digital guy, whether from the illustrator standpoint or even like a reading. I don't know how you guys read comics digitally. I don't. I think I've read maybe one and like it. I mean, I personally don't like the feel of the actual comic book. I think sort of like with movies, I think the digital stuff actually helps, which I like the idea that it would help bring people in. And I think that they may read some stuff online that may help them. Actually want the actual one, so it brings them to stores and maybe people that would normally go into stores the first time around. So I think that's good. I think comics, are sticking around for a long time. I actually think they're gaining momentum, gaining popularity. maybe more, than more so in a very long time. But I do think that people like me, maybe Andrew here, any of the traditional guys will start to be regarded as a little bit more of a classic sense, like, oh, my guy works traditionally, like this is an actual comic book page. You don't see that so much anymore, which is kind of sad to me, but if that's where the technology goes, that's where it goes. I like it because then it maybe makes me a little bit more of a speciality, down the road. Like, I have an original page to sell. Who's doing that? Like, which is always kind of an interesting thing with digital artists. And I know that Sean Murphy will always be vocal about it, is that they don't have a page to sell. They can make prints, but for me, it's like I can draw a page. I get paid from the guys, but then I can turn around, I can sell my page again for more money. I know it's not greedy or anything, but like when it's your job and it's when your source of income, those pages count. And for me to consider working digitally is like, oh man, like then I don't have that portion of income for myself, so I would do it. But I hope comics stick around. Like, I got a little nervous at first, I think, when digital comics came out and all this stuff. Like, all these brick and mortar stores are going to close up, blah, blah, blah. But I don't see that. I don't get that feeling anymore. So I hope stuff sticks around. And I think, maybe it is, in general, more of a sort of classic genre to where people regarding it like opera or something. I mean, if that's a bad thing, then, again, probably good.
I think if you're gonna work in comics, you have to be okay with your stuff being digital. There's just no way around it. I also personally like to read a digital comic book. I love the smell of ink, especially like a fresh blood. I don't know. But I think also, loving comics that way is just a form of nostalgia. I don't think readers get to about that at all. But at the same time, I think digital is really good for like the business, the economy of the business. There's no overhead after the artists and editors are on cool with it. There's no printing cost. It gets books to, it gets your comics to readers for cheaper, and it's higher. It also encourages readers because becomes an impulse buy, which they are no longer. Once upon a time, there were spinner racks at the convenience store, the gas station, and you could be like, oh, Jack Kirby Fantastic Four, like that's long gone, And I think this is, Comixology is that new version that I really like this show when it dead. Oh, it wasn't coming. Now I have them all. You know what I mean? And now Robert Kirkman has even more money. He doesn't know how to do it. So I mean, those are all pros. I feel lucky that I'm still working in the time period where I'm pretty confident every comic I'll ever do will be printed. I'm grateful for that, but who knows? You can't predict what you can do.
Is that a good question there?
That was a very good question. I'd like to thank our guests once more.